back here with Richard Burdick for session 11 of our interview. Let's continue with your stories about your friend Andy from Detroit.
Well, I've told you some of the good ones, but okay. This is one of my all-time best stories about Andy. Here again, we're in the early 1980s, and I kept telling him, I had like 3 people wanted to buy high reliefs, and I kept asking Andy. He said, well, I got one, but you wouldn't like it. And I said, well, why not? And he says, I'm not going to sell it to you. Well, this went on for a couple of years. And finally, one day, he came over to my house on the island. The same oak table I've showed you. And he takes this coin out, and it was really rough, and kind of slams it down on the oak table. He reaches in his pocket, and he got out a 3-cornered file. And he set it right there, kind of roughly, right next to the coin. He says, I bought this coin in 1962. I bought it from Michael Coleman Jr., Federal Brand Coin Exchange in Cleveland. He was a pretty famous dealer at the time. And he said, I paid way too much money for this coin. I paid $850 for this coin. And I'd never spent that much for any coin, but he said this coin there was not a mark on it. He said, after I bought it, I found out that it was a fake. Some of the fakes came out, and some of them looked better than the real ones. He says, there's only one way I'm going to sell you this coin. You got to take a file and ruin one side of the coin so they'd only want it for maybe a belt buckle. So that's the only way I'll sell it to you. And gold was about $350 an ounce, I think, at the time.
Was that an Omega?
Let me finish the story. Okay. I don't know when the Omegas came out. I don't remember, but it could have been that time. So anyways, I can't. He picked up the file and slammed it down again, and I thought he was going to start doing this. And I said, Andy, wait a minute. You and I are not experts on this. Let me take this coin to Annex. Let them be the judge. They're supposed to be the experts. He said, well, okay, that's a good idea. So I drove to Milwaukee. There was a Central State show. And I'm not going to mention the dealers' names involved, but the first guy I showed it to, the first guy I ran into, and I walked in the door, is a very well-known dealer from Chicago. And this guy was very conservative. And showing the coin, he didn't ask a price. He just said, I'll give you $20,000 for this coin. Whoa. I said, well, I can't sell it. I brought it to show to Annex. And he says, well, if you want 20 grand for it, I'll give you 20 grand for it. So a couple tables down, I go to another very famous dealer from the Midwest, real smart guy in gold coins. And same thing, he wants to buy the coin. I said, I can't sell it. I brought it to show to the Annex. He says, well, I'll give you $25,000 for it. This is unusual for dealers to do this. And I had some suspicions about this coin. Next guy I show it to is one of the biggest dealers from New York. I told him what had happened with this guy and with this guy, and he says, I'll give you $27,500. And I said, this coin, what is it about this coin? They all want to buy it. So I went around a little bit more, and there was a famous dealer from Boston. He floated off the chair when he saw this. I told him the story about these other guys. And he said, just how much? I said, look, I'm not going to put a price on this coin. I got to show it to Annex. So I went over there, and Ken Brissett was behind the table. He's got his microscope. And I mean, he's an extremely brilliant numismatist. He's been around a long time.
What year is this again?
The early 80s, 1984.
Okay.
I'm thinking.
Kind of a slow coin market. So
It was just, the coin market was crawling out of the depths of 1982. So I showed it to Ken Brissett at Annex, and he studied it with his microscope on both sides. I just said, Ken, I brought it here. I want to know if it's real. He said, it's not only real, he said, it's about the best one I've ever seen. was, that's what you want. It's genuine in his opinion, and I trust his opinion. So I didn't show it to anybody else. But I drove home from Milwaukee, and I got home, and there's a bunch of messages on my message machine, and there were 6 messages from the dealer from Boston. He says, "Look, I'll give you $35,000 for that coin." I said, "Wait a minute." I said, "I think this coin must be a satin proof or something so special about this. It's got a different glowy look to it, and it's perfect. There's not a bag mark, nothing."
You slammed it on the table.
I wanted to put a file
God.
to it. So, actually, from Milwaukee, I called Andy from a payphone, the lobby of the hotel, and I said, "Well, I showed the coin to Annex," and he says, "No good." I said, "No, Andy, they said it's good." And he said, "What can you get for it?" And I said, "Just let me work on that." So I get home, there's all these answering messages, and it's the dealer from Boston. And he said, "Look, there's a show next week in New York." He says, "Just bring the coin." He says, I'm gonna pay you a big price for it." When I got there, his offer was $55,000. And I said, "There's a time to buy and sell, and this is a good time to sell when the selling's good."
Wow.
So he bought it. About 10 days later, I get a call from one of the largest dealers in New York. And he said, "Richard," he said, "I just bought one of the most magnificent high reliefs that I've ever seen. We've seen a lot of them." And he told me he paid $67,500 for it. And he says, "When you get coins like this, bring them to us." Which I started doing, and it was a good deal for both of us. But that's what happened with that so-called, it's a wonder Andy didn't file it before he got there.
Wow.
But he could not.
He was going to make you file it.
Yeah, well, he was, because he didn't want to do it. And he almost had me talked into it. I can't do this. This coin is I can't do this.
I saw in my days from my original mentor back in the mid-90s, he had a high relief 20, and he showed me the front, and it was absolutely spectacular. It had to be the top coin because the nose wasn't bent or nothing. It was absolutely a Mint State 68 coin. And you flip it over.
That's pretty high, even for those.
And you flip it over and you realize that the lady who had it kept it face down in her jewelry box and threw her jewelry into the jewelry box because the back was just scratched to death. So
Belt buckle.
yeah, you had a belt buckle coin if you had
or a necklace, jewelry piece.
That's amazing.
So,
Have you ever run into the coin again? Would you recognize it if you saw it?
No.
No.
I'm sure they got $100,000 for it.
Yeah.
I don't know. See, that's a coin that PCGS won't designate it as a specimen, but NGC will or has. And I don't think PCGS ever has recognized that. It's a controversial. Actually, I had seen one similar to that at the 1976 ANA in New York. Joe Flynn was a big-time dealer back then, run full-page ads in Coin World. He had a pair of high reliefs that I looked at, and they had a special look to them. And I didn't know that much about high reliefs, but I told you my best high relief story. It's one of my great Andy stories.
Well, you mentioned another dealer that you had met earlier. What do you know about? You got any good stories about John Albanese?
Yes, I do.
When did you first meet John?
I'm going to get to that. Around 81 or 2, Lester Merkin called me up on the phone, and he says, "A guy just called me. His name's John Albanese. He wants a line of credit for my auction." And I said, I said, "Lester, I've heard of this guy, but I've never met him, but I've heard he's got a really good reputation." So, I don't know, a year or 2 later, I'm at the Kalamazoo, Michigan State Spring Show, I think it was. And I'm walking around. This guy walks up to me and he says, "My name's John Albanese." He says, "I've heard you've got some really nice coins and I want to buy them." And I says, "Well, John, they're not for sale." He says, "Have you got any with you?" I said, "No, they're in my safety deposit box." He said, "Well, bring them to the show tomorrow. Please, just show them to me." So I took him 5 of my favorite coins. One was the 1805 dime that we've talked about, the 1823 bust half that we've talked about, 1831 quarter, 1795 $10 gold piece that also came from Andy, which was the first turbine head to every 64 at either service. So anyway, well, he graded later. This is before grading. So I laid out these 5 coins, and he said, "These are just what I'm looking for." I said, "Well, John, I told you these are not for sale." He said, "Just put some numbers on them." Yeah. Okay. So I just like doubled up on everything. The 31 quarter, I think I paid $7,500 for. I told him I wanted $15,500 for that. The 1799.10, I paid Andy, I think, $18,000. I quoted him like $30,000 for that coin. The 1823 bust half, that was $15,000. The 1805 dime, I think I quoted him $35,000. All these coins, there's a price on every one of them. And he looked at them. He said, "Richard, I'll take them all." I wasn't ready for that. I said, "Wait a minute, you tricked me. I'm not selling any of these coins. I'll take them all." So that's my first time with John Albanese. I've been a good friend ever since then. He said, "Just sell me one of them." And I said, "Okay, I'll say the 1831 quarter." And he paid me $15,500 for it. So a couple years later, he starts NGC, and he put that coin in a 66 holder. I didn't know this for several years later. So what the grading started, and he started NGC, 1987, I think. Well, the coin market got progressively stronger throughout the 1980s. And when the Kidder Peabody Wall Street money started flowing into the market, the prices of coins just went berserk. So I was at a show in New York City, and there was some dealer from Connecticut. I'd never seen him before, but he was one of the guys that was involved in the acquisitions for the Kidder Peabody Fund. And he's got some coins in this case, but there's my 31 quarter in a 66 holder. And I said, "How much is that coin?" What do you think he quoted me? Just take a guess.
35,000.
90,000.
Oh.
Which was a stupid price at that time. It's my coin. It was my coin. You know, I got 15 grand for it, but I mean, 90. It was above market even for then. And just 6 months later, the market crashed. And I never saw that coin again till like 2005. Yeah, I don't think I ever showed that coin. I might have showed it to Dr. Davis, but he never bought it. It might not have been for sale because I'd show him my things and they weren't for sale. So anyways, Dr. Davis was done collecting coins in 2005. We'd already sold his collection. But there was another guy who was paying really big money for really nice coins. And he asked me to go, if I was going to the auction. And yeah, he said, well, we talked about that coin. I told him I used to own it, all it, you know, and where it came from. He said, go ahead and buy it for me. So I did. $37,500. This is the price history of the same coin, see?
Right.
So right after, I mean, that was a fairly strong price for that coin at the time. And this guy came over. He's in Bloomfield Hills, Detroit. And he said, I wanted that coin for myself. You know, how can you pay more than I would for that coin? I said, because I could. We got to be good friends after that. And actually, I found him another 31 quarter that was almost as nice, but I think I got it for him for $30,000, quite a bit of money. So to finish that 31 quarter story, it was sold, I don't know, about 5 years ago. And in that auction, it brought $55,000.
Wow.
And that's what prices can go like this, from 8,000 to 15 to 90, and then years later back. And right now, it's probably worth a little more than, I mean, 55 at the time for a 66 coin. That was a pretty strong price.
Yeah.
And I don't know that, of course, the coin market took a little dip after that, and it's coming back nicely now. There's a pretty strong market for nice coins.
Yeah.
So, until I think of something else.
All right. Well, let's take a little break, and
Yeah.
we'll come back with more about John Albanese.